Okay, so thank you for being brave or interested, whichever it was that brought you here this morning. My name is Peggy Magdalene, and my background is teaching. I taught for 15 years, 10 of which were in a third grade classroom in the Valley, here. And my classroom it was a third grade regular education classroom, not special ed. But within that third grade classroom, third grade is a pivotal year, which you may all realize. They're leaving that primary focus and that innocence, and they're moving on to not a fence, but at least a hill, a hump. And still having that innocence and that open perception, yet more academics are coming in. And in fourth grade, of course, it launches off into so much more academia. And I have to apologize right at the start, because I wish I could have this more interactive, and I wish I wasn't just going to have to talk to you, but there's so much to cover. So in the best of all classrooms, it's not like this. This is exactly what I'm going to be talking that we should be doing differently, but I hope you understand. All right. So in that classroom every year, I would have at least 15% of the kids being on the spectrum: ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, Asperger's syndrome, and autism. All mainstreamable, but yet still with very recognizable characteristics. Now, what did I see? What was particularly amazing, and this is the pivotal part for me, these kids, more than anyone in the room, could get the deepest themes in the literature, in the history, social sciences, even in math. In math, they would get the broad picture, right? Not only that, they would be the out-of-the-box thinkers. They were the ones who were inspired. They were intuitive. They love movement, art, hands-on, all of these things that are so engaging with life, all right? Most of all, though, what was amazing about it was that they are incredibly empathic. They have a gut connection with the kids around them, with the world around them, and they sense and feel what it is that's going on with that individual. Motivationally, limitation-wise, value-wise, they know. They have a sense of knowing, and it comes from a place of knowing that is not the usual left brain assessment, okay? It is a gut knowing. Now, in addition to these amazing qualities that they had, then of course we have heard more about how they seem to be so different. Okay, what is it they can't do? They can't change the schedule during the day easily and often. It's too disruptive, right? They can't focus. They can't organize that well. Listening to just what I'm doing now, linear instruction, they shut down. Their brain actually shuts down just like a computer goes on screensaver. They totally shut down. All right, so routine math or drill and practice. Can't focus well enough to stick with that sort of thing. All right, and unfortunately, which is so characteristic, they do not have the social interactive skills that links them and allows them to feel connected to other people at this level, the social interactive level. This level, yes. Interactively, no. So very often we find that they're separate, and they're finding other individuals who are like them, or activities like going outside, playing on the playground, but alone, playing in the dirt, digging up little animals to play with, running around, whatever, looking kind of crazy to the other kids, right? So, of course, then this leads to labeling or teasing, which also tends to separate them from the rest. All right. Also, related to all of these characteristics, they tend to have poor or less developed motor skills. Small motor skills, so their handwriting is typically not good, and they may never improve, or might, and also large motor skills. So they lack coordination. They're not on the team sports because they can't keep up with the other kids. So another reason why they're off on their own. At the school I was in, what I developed at lunch is I developed a science center. And what it was all animals. I had exotic animals. I had snakes and turtles, and those were the kids that came in because they were not comfortable on the outside. All right, so this is what I saw. Year after year after year. and total inspiration in the classroom by them to the others. So I ended up getting more and more of these kids because the parents knew I could connect with them and the administrators knew this was a good classroom. And I got to the point where I had so many different learners that I couldn't handle it because I didn't get an aide. I was in a regular classroom, no aides. So I decided to take a year's leave of absence and to research this and to kind of say, okay, what am I supposed to do with these kids? So I did, and everything I put my hand on to do research corroborated, supported what it was that I found. And this is the conclusion I came to. And maybe you've heard this, maybe things are moving far enough along that we're understanding this now. I believe that these kids all have a right brain orientation. Now the right brain is what allows us to connect viscerally with our environment, with people, with all sorts of input, right? It's a broad, wide open exposure like this. Now, the problem is for these kids, and this is why we see the other side of the coin, is that there's no left brain filter. If you're taking in all the subtle stimulation of everything around viscerally, now this is possible solutions that we can't even explain how they come, why they come, inspirations. This is where inventors, innovators, scientists, they draw from, okay? But because there's no left brain filter, then anything coming in that's stimulation, stimuli, sound, color, the word, too many words, it's overkill. It's overwhelm, and they shut down for that reason too. They shut it off, they shut it down because they cannot take. You can know what it must be like. We've all been in some situations of sensory overload, and this is a constant, continual thing for these kids. So, a gifted orientation, right brain, and I call it a heart-centered orientation because when we're connected to people, we have, and as I said, with the empathy with these kids, they not only have empathy, but they want to make a difference. They want to help the kid next to them. They want the last person who comes in the room, who is a low guy on the totem pole for whatever reason, they're the ones that they befriend, they take care of, they support, not just for a short time. That becomes like a year-long, 6-month-long relationship because they feel good in what they're doing with it. All right, so we have this orientation, they have this limitation. Now some people say, well, why is it a gifted difference? Why isn't this just a disorder? Well, it's one of those situations. If you have a penny, can you have the face of Lincoln without the building on the back? It's impossible. If they had all the skills that we'd like them to have in this left brain world, which is a linear world, which is a systematic world, which is a world that abstracts things, if they had those abilities, would they then also have their openness? Would they have their wide open perception? No, they would not. So how can we say that the giftedness is a disorder when just because they don't act like the rest of us? Without this gifted perception, we would not have many of the great contributions that have come throughout all time. So it's a difference. It's a difference that we need to learn to accept and to learn from and to accommodate for in how we deal with them. Every kid in our class, we want them to perform at their best, but that means we have to sink in, we have to find out who they are and what allows them to respond. That's the best teaching. How do I allow this child to respond and to feel so good that he's willing and wanting to participate and wants to discover? Our innate nature to educate means to bring forth, that we want to bring forth what the child brings to us. To teach is to disseminate information. Left brain, all right? Big difference. Any questions so far? Okay, good. Moving on. So, I wanted to find the research and what I found. The first book I picked up, I went for a textbook, a recent textbook, and it's called Learning Disabilities and Related Disorders. And on the very preface, the first page, they said they're rewriting this edition because they're finding that so many of the disabilities are accompanied now by disorders. ADD, dyslexia, ADHD, autism, Asperger's syndrome. Then it goes on to say, yes, with these disorders, they can't seem to listen, they can't seem to focus, reading, writing are difficult, organizing, getting math, arithmetic, all these things are difficult. But at the same time, there is a sea of giftedness also along with these weaknesses, all right? And the giftedness is great empathy, being able to connect with people. All the things I'm talking about was right there in the book. Then they go on and they talk to businessmen and they say, it's much different. Once someone leaves school and they go out in the business world, these people are the CEOs. The ones who are the entrepreneurs are the ones who could not necessarily keep with the regiment, keep with the program of, okay, I'm going to learn this information, I'm going to learn this information, I'm going to disseminate, I'm going to repeat it, I'm going to give it back. No. This is all coming in like this to them, too much overwhelm, and they're already connected in, well, gee, what about that? And what about this answer? And how come this isn't happening? So they go out in the world. Many of them don't make it through school, or they do very poorly through school, right? They go out in the world, and they follow what their gut connection is. And they create a business, and if they don't have those skills, the left brain skills, they'll hire someone to do it for them. So there's a cooperative part of all this. And this is in the textbook still. The Learning Disabilities textbook is saying, dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, there seems to be a hidden giftedness here, a hidden mysterious element that we don't understand that needs to be further examined. All right. Another book you probably heard of called Driven to Distraction. It was written in 1994, and one of the authors was Dr. Hallowell. Here's a description I'd like to just read it to you. You might describe many with ADD as having a special something, a hard to pin down yet undeniable potential. In fact, there is a powerfully positive aspect to ADD and learning disorders in general, a positive aspect that is as yet ill-defined, something good. These individuals can be highly imaginative and empathic, closely attuned to the moods and thoughts of people around them. They also see new things or find new ways to see old things. They are not just the tuned out of this world, they are also the tuned in, often to the fresh and the new and the innovative. They are the inventors, the innovators, the movers, and the doers. Good doobies, like are they always going to follow the rules? Good doobies they may not always be, but we should be wise enough not to force them into any mold they'll never fit. If their potential is tapped, the results can be spectacular. Just what I was saying. Pick up a book, I go to the internet, everything I looked at, it was talking about exactly this. Famous screenwriter from Hollywood, dyslexic. His name is Stephen Cannell, and he did many of the old movies that were detective stories, TV programs, right? Dyslexic, but loved to write. Had trouble through school, had to stay back a couple grades, finally made it through high school. Because he was a good football player, he had enough recognition and self-esteem that he made it through, went to college. When he went to college, he realized he loved to write. How was he going to make it? So what he did was he would sign up for 20 units a semester, go to the teacher and ask, how important is spelling in your class? And if the teacher said it was important, he dropped the class. And so finally what he did, and this is what these people do, if they succeed, they find the way to get around it. He's in a class, the guy says, go for it. I don't care how you write, how you spell, go for it. And so from that, he goes on, becomes a major studio director, producer, as well as screenwriter. And his own kids now, who have ADD dyslexic tendencies, he knows the only way to help them get through is to go ahead and have tutors, have support, whatever, so that they can make it through the system, so they can get out and do what it is that they're here to do. All right, so it is a little different than the perspective has been in the past. Great, thanks. Okay. Now, in addition to these two sources and many others, in these two sources, they also talk about who has made a contribution. We said these kids want to make a contribution. They want to, they're geared to it. It's like their mission in life. It's like their purpose. Their purpose is to find something different and to bring it forth, and it's for the well-being of themselves or people around them. Well, how many people in the world do you think have been like that? Tons. And guess where they were with their education, and guess what they did with school? Most of them were considered lazy, stupid, uneducable, and were out. and were out of school. Who were these people? All right, there's a long list, and this doesn't even touch the whole list. They're inventors, innovators, artists, poets, writers. All right, who do we have? Mozart, Poe, Shaw, Dali, Salvador Dali. Some of you are flipping around to follow along. If that's good for you, that's great. If it's not too disruptive, then it's fine for me. So Mozart, Poe, Shaw, Dali, Lincoln, Disney was a cartoonist. You know why he was a cartoonist? Because he didn't like words. And he had a natural inclination to cartooning. I have to tell you a story about that for my class. Okay, Agatha Christie couldn't write, became a writer. Leonardo da Vinci, Churchill, Theodore Roosevelt, Goethe, Balzac, Hemingway, Charles Schwab, Nelson Rockefeller, Newton, Dickens, and nowadays, many, many people who were also in the computer business. The reason many of them are in the computer business and they were in their garage innovating was because they have this connection, they have these inspirations, they have these ideas, and they can't, in fact, they get too bored sitting in a classroom. All this network of amazing ability shuts down, totally shuts down if they're in a classroom. So either sit in this classroom and get, labeled and poor grades, or cut out, get out, and do what it is that works for me. And they have a sense, they know. Nowadays, however, how much it's harder for kids to do that because the emphasis is more and more that everybody's supposed to go to college, right? Everybody's supposed to go to college. It used to only be a much smaller percentage. And there used to be vocational aspects to our education. With No Child Left Behind, with Race to the Top, it is all towards performance, as we know. It's all for what can be tested for. What can you test for? Can you test for what we're talking about? Or can you only test for information? You can only test for information, and now teachers also are getting potentially to be evaluated based on how well the kids do on their information performance on these tests. Very dangerous. This is not the sort of thing to allow people to make contributions that can make a difference. All right, so questions yet at this point? Yes?
Yeah, I understand I can see what you're talking about with ADD and like dyslexia, but you mentioned autism and Asperger's a couple times, and I don't really see that with those kids.
Right, okay. Great, thanks for staying right with me. I mean, that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
So the question is, repeating it here, this is understandable. Everything I said is understandable for what we might say one end of the spectrum, lower end of the spectrum, ADD, ADHD, dyslexia. What about the other end of the spectrum, Asperger's syndrome, autism, and even, I find, bipolar disorder? Okay, I'm going to take a sip. Okay. What's so about this orientation and about all of these individuals is that not only are they more right brain oriented with amazing skills that way, but they are extremely sensitive. They have extremely sensitive nervous systems. All right, now on the one end of the spectrum, ADD, ADHD, where the kids can't seem to stay organized, right? Helter-skelter, but sometimes too there's reason for that. Everything that's around, if you go into a really creative teacher's, I'm thinking of one in particular, office, everything is everywhere in stacks, but they know where it is and they pull from it to do what they want to do. Asperger's and autism, the kids are so sensitive, they need to have a structure, they need to have a routine, and without those things, what happens is unexpected stimuli comes in, unexpected change comes in, and totally throws them out of balance. So they are so sensitive that they, on the same spectrum, but the far end of the spectrum, must have control, must have structure, routine, in order to insulate against this shock that comes in from the outside. All right, now, I know we've all heard about Temple Grandin, thank goodness. I mean, I have you all. Yes or no? Okay. She's become so much more well-known, thank goodness, to the HBO movie, Temple Grandin, Different But Not Less. Temple Grandin, as you probably know, was born in the 40s, diagnosed in the 50s with autism. So one of the first individuals diagnosed with autism. Thank goodness she had a mother who was very much in tune herself, and she guided her, continued to put Temple out in the world to see what Temple can do, how she was going to meet the world. However, Temple did, like most autistics, she flapped her hands and she spun. Now I want to say that I also did, in addition to my 3rd grade teaching, I did spend time, 3 months in a special ed classroom here in the area, intermediate school, because I wanted to see whether or not what I was feeling and what I was finding, if it applied also in a special ed situation with the more, not the mild to moderate, which we have been speaking about, but now the more moderate to severe disorders, differences. So Temple Grandin flapped her hands and spun around, as do many autistics. And I really hadn't seen that level, but in this special ed classroom I saw much of it. And thank goodness she made it through. She made it through high school, college, got a PhD, and now is one of the world's renowned, highly respected for the treatment of animals, and is now also a wonderful speaker for autism here and around the world. I think she's going international this way, I'm not sure, but she should be. All right, so what she said, now that she has written about it in some amazing books. Emergence is an autobiographical work. It is totally enrapturing to read her story of her life in Emergence. It tells how she accessed her right brain and why it helped her get through everything. Having gotten to the point of success where she is and being able to write a book, she tells us the reason kids flap and they spin is it, along with, for instance, like with Rain Man, kids also will repeat a phrase. What Rain Man did, any new situation, he'd say, who's on first, what's on second, whatever that whole little ditty is, right? If they're spinning and flapping, if they're saying a repeated phrase, what happens is that they insulate themselves. It shuts out the overstimulation from the outside. And when they are in the inside, it's peace and quiet. Which side of the brain do you think accesses peace and quiet? The left side of the brain, which is linear, mathematical thinking, words and all that, or the right side of the brain that you have when you're looking at a landscape or you're building something. Which one is more peaceful than the other? The right side of the brain. So when they are insulated, and they are insulating themselves by doing the spinning and the flapping and the repetition, they are in a place of peace and quiet. And Temple Grandin says it was in this place of quiet that she really, all of a sudden, she would get inspirations and knowings that she had no idea how they were arising. It is not an arena where you can understand what happens. It's the arena of connection and inspiration. So many of these people, all of these people that we just quoted, Einstein, for instance, Einstein was dyslexic. And he thought in pictures, much like Temple Grandin does. If you haven't seen the movie, you'll see that they were able to use the special effects to show. She's thinking in pictures, and she can, gauge the degrees of everything, angled degrees. And Einstein thought in pictures. And what I've read is that he imagined what it was like to ride on a light beam. And riding on a light beam, then he was able to intuitively integrate then how the speed of light with all the other things that are involved in this understanding. He came up with the theory of relativity. But now when it actually came to writing the formula, he was not good with arithmetic, which is more left brain, 2 + 2. So his brother was good. So he goes to his brother. The brother helps him with the arithmetic side, and he's able to put the formula with the inspiration. And so it comes up with E = mc². And this is on and on and on with all of these examples. All right, so what is it then with these more severe kids? They are connected. How many of you have seen any YouTube videos where they take an individual who is more in this autistic, or most likely autistic, take them up in an airplane and they fly over Rome for a couple of hours? Have you seen that one yet? Yeah. They fly over Rome for 2 hours, and the next 5 days they go ahead and they draw a picture of Rome with every window and every door, exact proportions, the entire city. Now, the thing about the right brain for some of these kids is like a blank film. So they go up, they're totally open, none of this left brain filtering getting in the way, and they're basically having exact filming, memorization, imprinting, I guess you would call it, imprinting of what they see. So, Rain Man. You know the story of Rain Man? The true story of Rain Man. Rain Man's real name was Kim Peek, and he was raised by his folks jointly for a while. And about 30, his mom left the scene. He was raised by his dad. But early on, his parents had been told that he's going to be retarded, that he should have a lobotomy, but they didn't go with it. And by age 7, he had already memorized the first 7 encyclopedias of the set at home, right? So he's saying, I think something else is going on here, right? So as Kim grows and gets older, he's able then, he'll go up to someone and say, what day were you born? And the person will give him a date, and he knows, he's memorized all this. It's imprinted. And he knows, he can tell the person, well, that was a Tuesday, and it was, if it just happened to be, a holiday, he'll tell them also it was a holiday, in 1947, okay? 1947, well, that was a Tuesday, this was the such and such a holiday. He's able to do all this. Then he goes to Stanford, or he goes to university on the East Coast, and they're asking him, the students are all, it's a packed house, and kids are all asking him questions. He knows everything, and he can tell them the when and where of everything. And when he sees people on the street and in this student arena, he says, I'm so glad to meet you. You're a wonderful person. And then he'll do it again. He's somewhat repetitious with every person. He's telling him, I'm so glad to meet you. You're a wonderful person. He has this connection. Well, so his father takes care of him every day, helps him dress, helps him get to where he's going, all the essentials, the day-to-day routine that he cannot take care of. And finally, his dad's 80 years old, and he says, we better go to Stanford and get you tested and find out what it is all these years that has been so different about you. So they go and they get him tested, and it turns out he doesn't have a corpus callosum, which is the tissue which joins the left and the right brain. So they say to his father, this is why your son is not able to be rational. And so his father kind of, steps back, and at the end of the interview, this is a video interview, later also repeated in a New York Times article, what they say, so they tell him, this is why your son can't be rational, right? And so someone says to the father, okay, what do you feel about this? And I'm skipping one part in the story. First they go to Kim Peek, they go to Rain Man, and they say, what about this man who's taken care of you all these years and helps you every hour of the day? And Kim Peek says, my father and I share the same shadow. Then they go back to the father. And the father says, Kim may not be rational, but what he just said was beyond the norm. It was extraordinary. And if you think about it, when Kim Peek said, my father and I share the same shadow, it is not a left brain analysis, a literal analysis of, well, he's my father, I'm so grateful, any of that. But when he says, my father and I share the same shadows, I just got shivers, that there is something profound. It's like what we find in poetry. It's what we find in any inspired sort of writing or communications. It goes to a depth. And so Kim Peek lived in this arena of having a depth of perceptiveness related to people and this ability to give out information that he knew that was an imprint upon him, not able to function in a day-to-day way, but having other sorts of gifts, as did Einstein. Yes, thank you for the question.
So, and continuing on that, so then is empathy and compassion for others, is that in your right brain? Because if you do, if you are someone, a child with autism, and it is in the right brain and that's open, I don't understand how the two don't meet. Does that make sense?
Well, I think I understood it, and I have an example that will, or maybe let me repeat it and you tell me if I got what you said. So if compassion and empathy then arise from in our right brain, and yet in autistics, all right, they have to shield themselves from the world, and seemingly because they're shielding themselves from the world, they would lack that empathy and they would lack that compassion. The two are in contradiction. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, how is one so able to be, like you said, being able to think of something deep and profound like my father and I share the same shadow, but yet not be able to, not care how their actions affect another. I mean, all of my dealings with students with autism have been that they have zero to no empathy. Yeah, I mean, I don't understand how, I'm just curious.
Okay, so let's explore it a little bit. So the question is further, right there?
Yeah, it's kind of off of that though, like, because I work with Asperger's, and it's not that they don't
or the ones I work with, you know, most of them get it, they just don't apply it. Like, you can stop and ask them, okay, and how might that make them feel, or blah, 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 or you can flip it around, and they seem to, like, understand, oh yeah, that person's kind of frustrated, isn't that interesting? It's like, they get it,
Right.
they just don't
Catch
care.
on it, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like they're very literal. They don't try to explain abstract concepts too that would seem to be,
Very left brain.
Yeah.
well, what I was thinking of was when you explain things that would, or you try to do things that you think more right brain people would get, you know.
Well, it depends. Now, you're explaining it. So if you're explaining it, you're still using the part of our brain which is linear, and you're still using a part of the brain that accesses thought. All right? What we're talking about is a part of the brain that does not access thought. It is, in fact, I'll jump forward a little bit. This is a right brain. It is enigmatic the way the right brain functions. And the reason it is enigmatic is that you cannot go there to understand it. You cannot go there to access it. And it is out of the arena of thought and word, so you can't go there with the left brain. So even though you would try to explain something abstract and you think they would get it, that's not the same as being connected. The realms are separate. And what's so amazing is that we all have both hemispheres. We all have both hemispheres. So that we can access the world and label it, right? But we also can intuit. And how much we've stepped away so much from our intuitive side, from our ability to see, sense, and feel. Little bits that we get sometimes, ahas or epiphanies, or just the sense of, gee, even paying attention to, gee, I feel some vibes from that person or somebody that they don't quite fit with me. This is also an intelligence. And they're finding more and more that there are intelligences that we do not pay attention to. Let me back up for just 1 minute. There was a discussion just a little bit earlier, and the comment was, if you are trying to speak to these individuals or have them understand more empathy to be with other people, how come they don't? How come they're mean at times and reactive? Okay, a couple things with that. They're mean and reactive, for one thing, is because the sensory stimulation is coming in that's so just violent to them at times. Also, I just lost that one thought. Let me catch it back again. All right, so it's violent to them as far as they do not have those habits. I was just reading this morning, looking at bipolar disorder, and what they were doing with the parent and the child is they were making those memory traces in the brain by saying, well, how do you think this other person would react to that? And the bipolar child would say, well, gee, they probably don't like it. What could you say differently, right? And he could say, well, I said this differently. So in order to be able to really try to interact, it is this instructive methodology and approaches where maybe they can help they can understand how their approach to others can be much more pleasing. But it's a learning thing because their natural response is going to be one of aversion, one of repulsion, and therefore self-defense, and therefore also not even being able to consider other people's behavior that well, or their impact on them. Okay, so where did we leave off? Yes.
I just wanted to add to that, and that Temple Grandin, who is, I think, one of the most articulate people living
Yes.
in the spectrum,
Right.
says that it isn't that we don't feel, it isn't that we don't get it or see it. This is exactly what we were touching on, that it's just we don't have we don't express it perhaps in the same way, we don't have the same tools to express it. And then, you know, again, we have super overloaded senses sometimes so that we react to it in a different way. It's
Right.
that we don't want to be touched, isn't that we don't want to be loved, we just, you know, she built a squeeze machine because of that. She built a squeeze machine because she wanted to be touched and held.
Yes, exactly.
And so it wasn't that it was just that when she received it, it was in a completely different, it did different things to her body than what normally does to another body. If we get held and we get touched, it feels good. It didn't feel good to her because she has, you know, a huge amount of neurons in that part of her brain receiving that information. So she found a way to do it. So I think that often in terms of the students that I work with who are Asperger's as well, mostly, is that they do care, and you can see it. And they're just demonstrating it in a different way. And one student sat across the classroom for half the year. And then eventually I heard him say something. I thought he wasn't interested in what was going on with the rest. But he was having conversations with that group over there. He just didn't want to be near them.
Yes, it's an amazing.
I made out that he was really interested in having
Yes,
part of the group.
amazing juxtaposition that's going on in the brain, because there is this connection and yet there is also this pull away. And it's also amazing to read, and I'm sure you've been hearing about this too, that the brain is so malleable. Things can be changed in the brain. It seems to be set, or it's developed in a particular way as individuals grow with certain connections, certain aversion, but things can, and individuals, thank goodness, we're born with so few instincts that we have a broad spectrum of experimentation that we can do with life. And so many autistics and other individuals have learned to go ahead and make those adjustments necessary to be able to have the interaction that they want to. There's an individual I just saw recently. He belongs to a group called ASCEND, ASSCEND, and it stands for, I can't remember the whole thing, Autism, Asperger's. Anyway, it's a wonderful group. You can look it up online, ASCEND. And this gentleman was in his late 40s, and he was an MIT graduate, okay? Autistic, but with all the same sorts of things with the aversions. After he graduated from MIT, he went for a job that was commensurate with that education. But he found that he didn't have the skills to be able to interact with the people, so he felt so lonely, so separate from all of us, and yet he wanted to have a relationship. But much like most of them, Temple Grandin and others, cannot be touched. The sensitive system does not allow the touching. And I have to bring up here, what we do with most newborns when they're first born? You wrap them. Yeah, well, you hold them and you swaddle them. Swaddling a newborn, if you wrap the baby tightly in a blanket, which if you look at most Native American and Paboose, how is the baby wrapped? That helps to insulate the child and to calm down the nervous system while they are adapting to all the stimulation that's now coming into the body. So the squeeze machine of Temple Grandin, which she knew since childhood that she was going to invent something and find something like that, visionary. Okay, so this young man, autistic, MIT graduate, felt so alone in that work, he finally quit. And he started actually, to help him with sensory overload, he started doing Zen meditation, because he found that by doing meditation, he could observe his reactivity and he could make different choices about it. But in addition to that, he always wore earplugs, took earplugs with him as he was on the bus. He knew how to insulate himself. And then, in order to have, this is really amazing, in order to have the interaction with people that he longed for, he forced himself to be in situations where he was isolated. And for instance, I'm not too sure about this fact, so I won't say that right now. I'll move on to what he did do is he chose, instead of this MIT-related job, he became a handyman. Being a handyman, he could serve people. He could use his hands, right brain, all that. He could use his ingenuity, but he could have peripheral interaction with people. He would be around people, be helping them, serving them, but he did not have to be one-on-one, touching, whatever. And so that need of wanting to be in connection was being fulfilled also. And he would also go to Zydeco dancing, which he said is crazy dancing for crazy people. So he was able to find those things in life that allowed him to feel balanced, much more balanced. All right, somebody have the time, and there's no clock in here, so I'm, here we back here.
It's 11:34.
11:34. All right, so we still have some time.
Yeah, we need to be back at 12:50.
Yes, okay, very good. All right, any other questions right now? You want to stand up and stretch? Take a break? 5 minute, okay, yes, question here.
You may have just touched on it at the end there, but despite trying to reconcile whether or not these autistics are empathetic, do you have the other direction? What is some embodiment, some proof that, yeah, the autistics, the Asperger's, they're very empathetic, and here's how we know that.
Okay, I have a good example. The question was, are there some examples that I can share that show that autistics and Asperger's individuals are empathic? All right, couple. I mean, the stories are so amazing, so amazing. Here's one. This was on CNN, and it was televised, and you can also find it on their site. And this was in 2009. They had this whole day dedicated to autism because it was the World Awareness Day for Autism. So that's what they did with their coverage that day, most of their coverage. And they told about this winery in Japan. I guess Japan has, as the whole world does, we have a prevalence, we have a number of autistic individuals. We now know, and you've probably heard, that 1 in every 110 individuals now is getting diagnosed with autism. So they have a lot of young adult autistics, as we do, and what they have living in activity centers for them. And so this one winery was staffed by, this was also a school, but it was staffed by autistic individuals. Well, Japan has never been able to make very good wine. It's too cold in the winter, it's too hot in the summer, and this particular winery was very difficult to work on because it was on a really steep hill. So, wanting to improve the production, this family decided to call a gentleman named Bruce Gutlove, and he was working here in the Napa Valley. He's a winemaker. So, he goes to Japan. He knows nothing about autistics, so he just expects what he normally expects from workers. And looking around, he's saying, with this hillside and with these vineyards, there's no way to use machinery. So all the students were used to do the everyday, repetitive, necessary behaviors, the functions for the vineyards, pruning them, watering them, picking them, harvesting, right? The crushing, all these different things. Well, if you know, autistics love repetitive sorts of behaviors, right? But you give an autistic individual also the added motivation that they want to make a better wine for the world to drink. Bruce Gutlove said there were many times when the challenges were so great, he was exhausted saying, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. But students, once they knew that this is what was going on, that they're going to make a better world for the world to enjoy, you couldn't stop them. So they kept going and going and going, and Gutlove was just blown away. So he keeps going, and sure enough, they produce a Chardonnay that gets national recognition. And so they all end up getting fed by the results of what was going on. So here are these kids doing what they do best, repetition, but yet doing it with a drive that comes from this innate connection. And they produce a wine that pleases, so they all win. Bruce Gutlove was supposed to be there just 6 months, 3 months, I think. Still there after 20 years. But he says he's not there for the wine. He said there is so much satisfaction that he sees in being there, and there's so much that is given between him and the others and all of them together. They cited one of the young men, 28 years old, had come when he was quite young, wasn't speaking, wasn't doing anything, right? Now that individual is talking nonstop and is so proud, he labels all the bottles of the red wine that he helps to make. So right there, both things together. He's so excited, he's so pleased he's making a red wine. Talking nonstop opens him up to talk, okay? And what is he doing? He's labeling bottles. So the paradox again, apparent limitation, what we would consider limitation, but this very deep connection. Now, I'd like to point out just real quick before I get your question, when Rain Man, after the producer saw Rain Man and decided to pattern the story upon his abilities, not so much directly on his life. When Rain Man got all the acclaim he did from the movie, Rain Man was no more reclusive. He would go out on the street and he's talking to everybody. He goes and speaks to a whole room of university students. A local student here, he's running a site where he helps people set up websites. And I talked to him, he says, yeah, I've got ADD, but you know what, I wasn't finding it nothing was helping me in school. I was frustrated, I didn't have any connection to people. He says, I went to the alternative school. You know what? They treated me like an adult. Couldn't stop me. Got great A's, and even during when he was in the other school, he was already conferring with people on how to work on their websites. So the intelligence, the lack of connection, but also what really does isolate these individuals is the rest of the world. Our opinion of them, our labeling of them. There's a great book just about a local man here. It's called A Regular Guy. I don't know if you've heard of it. A regular guy was written about, a young man who went to Lafayette schools, autistic. What's he want to be? He wants to be a regular guy. Why? Because he's been told so often he's not. And yet he also has these connective abilities, these different habits. To me, this is a new diversity. It's not a new diversity. It's that we need to recognize a diversity that has been here and stop thinking that normal. I'm going to jump way ahead here and say, look at our world. Our world has become basically governed by the same principles that we've been educated by. Left brain, information, data, acquisition and repetition, retrieval, classification, distinctiveness, hierarchies, right? Words in and of themselves, if you're in a beautiful landscape, can you find the words to express it? Really? What can we express? We can express words for found objects, for people, but in effect what words do is words delineate, separate, hierarchy, put in an order, right? And then we take these words. In fact, that's what happens with Piaget and with thinking. Kids we all start out connected. Then we start getting words and we use them as symbols to represent, what we're connected to. So by 7, kids are still using words and getting better at using words to organize things, but they still represent something real. Do you know what happens at age 11? Anybody? Okay, the mind has the ability to totally abstract starting at age 11. So whereas before perception was directing our thinking, now at age 11 kids are able to just deal with the words conceptually. So then what happens? It's not our experience that's directing our thinking. Then our thinking is directing our experience. Then you think about what the implications are of that. I see you, I have this thought system about you. Okay, some questions.
We're taking these kids who, like you are talking about, and they're not good at math, and they're not good at English, they're not doing well at it in school,
Right.
So we medicate them and we put them in 2 math and 2 English. So, how, I know obviously it's like take them, put them in 1 math, 1 English, give them art. We all know what the day should look like. But what can you do when you're in?
What can you do if we're in the system, right? Okay, so let's take a look at that for a minute.
Second grade before they're 11.
Exactly, it's just.
I didn't hear your last
I
comment.
said we're teaching algebra at 2nd grade.
Yes,
before they're 11.
okay, so to repeat the question,
Abstract math,
If they're not there yet.
in the modern education system, we are all teachers here. Okay, so what do we do? What can be done? What's being done is still trying to load them in some way for them to get information, and many times kids are being medicated in an attempt to make it so that they can retrieve and be accessible to left brain information. Okay, and as you suggested also right behind her is that our expectations, as we know, are going sooner and sooner and sooner down the level to where heightened, high math is getting introduced. More and more abstract math, by the way, is getting introduced earlier and earlier. Kindergartners, as I left the teaching, were already getting asked to make sure they can read before they leave kindergarten. All right, these are the years when kids should still be experiencing. And these great minds, many of them never could acclimate to the written word or the read word for years until they had had enough of this experiential, perceptive relationship with life to get inspired. And when someone gets that inspired and comes up with something, they're going to find a way to communicate it, if they can. All right, so there's the question. What do we do? I don't know if you've heard about the 2 movies that have been out recently, one called Race to Nowhere, and another one called Waiting for Superman. All right, 2 different situations, and I'm going to bring in another component here because this is very important also. Which one should I talk about first? Race to Nowhere. So we have had No Child Left Behind. We now have Race to the Top, which I knew I could hear as soon as wonderful President Obama in so many ways still trying to find his exactly the right means of leading us, okay? But he hired on, asked this individual from Chicago to join him as our head of the Department of Education. And immediately you could hear that what it is going to be more, and we're going to test it, and teachers are going to be, have to be accountable for the results of what the kids can show on tests. Again, what can you test on tests? Only information. I'll give you a quick example here, which I wanted to do with you, but there's no time. Take a group of kids and say to them, okay, I want you to tell me about Moraga and Lafayette and tell me everything you know about the products, the income, the terrain, da-da-da, da-da-da. Well, nowadays they're getting pretty good. They probably could go on the internet and they could give us the population, the income, right? All these things. Information. And this is getting asked more and more. Know this about this, know that about this. They can find the information. My goodness, we have computers. They carry information. All right, now, how long do you think the kids are going to retain all that information? Until they have a test. And it's gone. What was the other?
Yes. Hopefully.
Hopefully, right.
You not really lose it after the test.
Now, here's another approach to the same question. What are the products or what or whatever in Moraga, right? Tell me about life in Moraga. You take a group of kids and you say, all right, you're living on land. You're living on the land here. I want you to tell me what you need to do and what you're going to do about it. Get them together in a group. And they say, well, there's nothing here. No, there's nothing here. What are you going to do? Well, we need water. Where are you going to live? We're going to have to find a river or a stream or something. We're going to live by the stream. All right. What are you going to eat? Well, I guess we're going to have to forage around, see what's available. Are there any plants that have seeds? Okay. All right. What about shelter? What are you going to do for shelter? All right. So from a situation where they are experientially immersed, they will discover and they will know the necessities, the approaches that one has to find in order to provide for the basic needs of food, shelter, interaction, ideological support in a world where you feel all alone or whatever. So, you know, whether it be a religion or a culture, whatever it is, you start building, okay, and then more people come to your community. Okay, so now what happens? Well, we're going to have to do this, we're going to have to do that. And they build and they build. But what happens? They're not learning facts. They're learning a structure that they can intuit, that they can figure out. And so this is education because you're pulling from their own resources to understand. Then, when they're asked to test, if the testing is, well, even if the testing isn't great, oh, okay, so they want some facts and figures, I'll do the best I can. But that doesn't have to shake them from the fact that they know, I have a better way of knowing. And if we all get smart as educators, we start appealing to and we start creating the situations where individuals can draw from within, which is education, rather than stuffing them and testing them, which is teaching. Now, there are some very important ramifications from all this. Let me check my notes, see what I'm forgetting, okay? Temple Grandin. Oh, let me tell you this real quick. There's a hunter-farmer analogy. The hunters, okay, from the time we're just basically talking about, a hunter would have a challenge. Got to go hunt some meat, right? He'd get a crew of people together to go with them. They would have to interact. They'd have to kind of strategize. There would be adrenaline going. They'd be excited about what they're doing. They'd go out and they'd have to be versatile and flexible enough at the time to keep changing whatever they had to do. They had to keep interacting, right? They were successful. They made the kill. They bring it back. They give it to whomever is going to take care of the animal for food. All right? These individuals love and do best with a challenge, a connective challenge. Okay? The people who dress the animal, they are much more routine about it. That's the hunter analogy. The other analogy is a farmer analogy. Now, not that farmers don't face challenges, climate and all that, but basically, if things are going well, kind of like in that vineyard, gut love was the challenge solver, right? And the autistics were able, with their repetitious skills, they were able to do the routines, but yet they still had this desire to serve and to make things better. A farmer, what do? Well, They plow the field, they seed it, they water it, they harvest it. What about the next season for the next crop? They plow it, they seed it, they water it, they harvest it, on and on, right? So hunters are much more right brain oriented, okay? Need a challenge. These kids love a challenge. They need a connection. The Japanese autistic workers, the challenge, the goal, the passion, create a good wine that people will enjoy. Simple, but drove them, right? Farmers are people who don't necessarily need that, okay? They can do business, accounting, whatever. Now, we have both in the world. And many times they work in complementarity. Or the best of all worlds, of course, would be that each of us would become a little bit more like the other in the analogies, so that we are each more balanced. Yes, question?
So I understand the concept that the world has to change its mindset. I'm not going to change the mindset of a high school group of students who are looking at the weird one on campus, who's flapping or doing whatever. Do they like to talk? Absolutely. They love to download. If you know Michelle Garcia Winner, you know, it's like, yes, I will give you a full speech, everything you'll never want to know about this one thing that I love. You know, I don't care that you just walked out of the room, I'm still telling you.
Yes.
And literally, I have those students.
Yes.
I walk out, they're still talking
Yes.
to me.
Right.
You know, and so I see, and I know where they're brilliant, but the fact is that they're still living in this world.
Okay.
And people aren't going to allow that brilliance if they can't stand it.
Okay. So the question is, if kids are so brilliant, and these kids are brilliant, and they want to tell you all about Asperger's, autism, whatever, they want to tell you all about their passion to the point where it drives everybody else totally crazy. Okay. This is a pivotal point, and this is so important. A couple examples. First of all, it depends on where you are. At the intermediate school here that I was teaching at in the special ed class, I was pulling around the Down syndrome kid in a wagon around the green. All the kids around just pleasantly looked at him, smiled at him, supported him. I took him into one room. I didn't realize that this was not going to be the right environment. He started screaming. Nobody in the room reacted. They all got up, said, "Is there anything I can do to help?" When I taught in my classroom in 3rd grade, we did everything that was necessary and possible to support everyone, but also anyone who was different. Let me go on just a little bit with this, okay? So if one of these individuals had done something that was a little bit more socially acceptable for the room, then we all went out to recess early, right? I found ways every day to turn ourselves inside out. And I have to share with you that this is what is the mystery of all of this. And that is that it's an out-of-the-box answer. The solution to what we're facing now in the world is an out-of-the-box answer. And this is what it is. And it was attested to. I don't know if any of you have heard of a movie called HBO Autism the Musical. Another great, it's in the resources, another wonderful experience and educational, as I said, a resource. Okay, in it, all these different autistics came, and this woman joined them together, and she wanted them to be in a musical production together. And some of them had amazing talents. One played the cello, and then they sang. And so one girl in the movie, her name was Lexi, and she's 13 years old. Now, Lexi could not communicate on a direct one-to-one basis, but she could communicate using a keyboard. And she sang. And when she sang, she had no problem with speaking, and she sang beautifully, right? Now, when Lexi was little and was showing autistic signs, the mother was having trouble with this because all the things that we know that would be very difficult for a parent. And so she resisted, and she fought, and she goes, "Why me?" This sort of thing. Until she realized the only way that I can truly come around with this is to love her, is to accept her unconditionally, to be here for her. And as a result of that, Lexi was allowed to be who she was. Lexi didn't feel the schism between what she was doing and what was expected of her. right? So she became more relaxed in the whole scene. And what happened for the mother? The mother herself let all the, what kind of agendas? Where are the agendas? They're in the left brain. She let go of left brain agendas. She let go of the must do and the to-dos and what about the rest of the world. She let them all go. And by doing that, she made what kind of a connection to her daughter? She made a visceral right brain connection. And when you go to the right brain and you go to connection there, you get out of separation. You start producing serotonin, which is a well-being chemical, which naturally is produced when we are with nature, with animals, and we accept. And I must say here, you go to any spiritual religion, whatever, some of the basic tenets of what's been given to us in religions, depending on whether or not they're out there on a limb or whether they are still authentic to what they propose acceptance. They're proposing love, acceptance, forgiveness. These are all connective things. Whereas if we're living in our heads, which is the world is, you said, what do we do in this world? Take a look at our world. How sane is it? What is the possibility that we're really going to do well in this world and we're going to be able to solve all these problems? Right now, okay, recently we've had this big economic downturn. You know how it happened? Okay. Money is no longer based on anything experiential. In America, money is not based on the gold system anymore, and the euro was never based on anything other than an agreement. Make it easier for people to get into the housing, which started out as a good idea, but then greed came into it, and they went on this virtual trip with our relationship with money and our relationship with contracts and people's lives. And when they started selling to other people these same contracts, and then other people started losing their houses, all of a sudden we started to see what is the real result of living in your head. What is the experiential result, the negative experiential result of living just in your head? And not only that, do you know what comes from just living on one side of your brain, particularly the left side of the brain? People want more. They want more of money. They want more of experience. They want more of pleasure, you name it. They want more food, whatever. Why do people want more? Does anybody have an idea? Why do people want more?
You can never get to a point of satisfaction.
Right. You cannot get to a point of satisfaction because we are missing part of ourselves. We keep trying to fill up with something, with things, for what we're missing. What are we missing? We're missing our experience in the moment of life, of connection, of service, of fulfillment, of some downtime, of peace and quiet, of using our hands again, which many people now are starting to do because they can't continue to afford to buy things. You know what happens when people use their small motor skills? It produces dopamine. So women used to knit and do all this stuff. It produces dopamine, which prevents Parkinson's. The more we become a world that is run by computers in our heads, the less we are involving our whole body, our balance of left and right brain. And instead of medicating for these things that we are no longer producing, we could get back into producing these chemicals naturally in ourselves. Serotonin, dopamine, all these things that used to be part of the whole functioning human system. We're now living. There's an analogy, a cute little analogy that I like. There's a deer male, a male deer, all right? And he's walking through the forest, and he's grown his antlers so big, he can no longer walk through the forest. Where are we? We are so left brain that we are on the verge of not making it. Things are falling apart. We don't know how to solve all these problems. Well, how can we solve many of the problems? We were born with both sides of the brain, and there are answers that we are not bothering. We have no idea how to access because we've forgotten how to live there. These are ideas that come from who knows where. We can't explain it, we can't, but there are places and there are feelings and there's empathy and there's connection and there's a desire to serve and a desire to solve and to create well-being for all. and we ain't using it. So is that an out-of-the-box answer for what we need to do? It's not. Continue on with high expectations and more and more and more and more thinking. It's all right, stop doing some of that and start having empathy, acceptance, start finding your own creativeness, start finding the solutions, and start teaching in a way that we are allowing children to be connected to their environment in a way that they can discover and that they can bring forth a knowledge that they can build on, a knowledge that they then is theirs because it's not just superficial information. You with me?
I agree with you, and I'm just wondering, can we do that and still follow the, if we have a pacing guide and a standardized textbook? And
Okay, so I never got back to this, all right? So the question was, they follow me and they're with me, but how do we do it when this is what's expected in school? Race to Nowhere was made locally. Race to Nowhere is a movie that was made locally and it was played locally throughout the United States and now internationally. And it's saying we have all these expectations for students to meet. Now this is an affluent community. All right, so they're supposed to get really high grade point, above 4.0 if possible, right? They're supposed to be on the traveling soccer team or whatever, so that means they're out until 7 at night. They're also supposed to be volunteering. Then they're supposed to go home and do their homework, so they're up till midnight, and they get up the next day. And not only that are they doing that, but the younger ones in the family are getting the same sort of hype as far as what they need to work on their homework. And so the family is caught up in this. And then you get individuals who are so stressed. They say, this isn't the race to the top. This is a race to nowhere. Kids committing suicide. Nowadays, right now, 5 college students in America, 5 students a day commit suicide. And I heard that from the president of NYU as he spoke on Charlie Rose recently. Internationally, it's worse than that. India is worse than that. This is the stress when you put so much pressure on the left brain and your performance and your image, and so little balance to what we're doing. So Race to Nowhere, made locally by parents, and you didn't know that till at the very end, it was Lafayette schools, but they're citing schools across the country. So they're showing this so inspirationally. What a great idea. They're showing it at elementary schools, they're showing it at colleges, and they're asking parents, what do we do? So I know you're going to feel constrained by the system, but you have to stop and ask yourself. And another movie, Waiting for Superman, they talk about going into the ghettos and helping individuals. And there are 3 things that they do that worked really well. And this is not in the paper, so right on the back. I went to a talk for Race to Nowhere, and a woman spoke who was the educational consultant for it. This is very short and easy. She said there's something called the resilience theory. The resilience theory has 3 tenets to it. And it says, in the face of adversity, there are 3 things that we can help an individual do to help them to thrive. 1, make sure they have caring relationships.
What relationship?
Caring relationships. 2, now this can be misinterpreted, so we'll restate it. The second one is supposed to be high expectations, but how would that come in today's world? It would be more of the same. So rather than just high expectations, I would say optimal opportunity. Caring relationships, optimal opportunity. And the third one is meaningful participation. Meaningful participation. So that means you're working with an individual and they feel connected, they feel acknowledged, they feel honored for what they are contributing to what's going on. That is in Waiting for Superman. The way they're moving ghetto kids all the way up through college is they're shadowing them and supporting them and having these 3 things: caring relationships, optimal opportunity, plus, you have to see the movie to understand all this, and meaningful participation. If you take those 3 things into your classrooms and you say, we need to make changes.
I don't think there's anything wrong with saying high expectations. I mean, it's misconstrued if you're in Moraga. But where I teach in Pittsburgh, I mean, I say that all the time. I have high expectations.
That's great. And it depends on where you are for high expectations. When I just spoke with a woman, she said some people are misinterpreting it just to continue.
That's like the
That's
super
right.
kid you were talking
Right.
about.
I'd like to mention a movie that you would love to see. Okay, it's so good. It's called Like Stars on Earth. It's made in India. It's of the same size and magnitude, even bigger than, what was the other one that was here a while back? Slumdog, okay? Okay, Like Stars on Earth. It focuses on a young man who has dyslexia and ADD. It is the full story of what we're talking about, the absolute full story. You will be blown away. It's 2.5 hours long. Have a box of Kleenex by for both the sadness and the joy. It is phenomenal. So I think our time's up, right? Thank you very much for coming. I've enjoyed talking with you all.